Hello and welcome to today's webinar event, breaking down the relentless risk of ransomware. Today's event is brought to you by Druva and produced by Actual Tech Media. Before I introduce you to today's presenters, let's first do a little bit of housekeeping here that we need to cover. First off, we want this to be an educational event. So if you have questions about ransomware, about data protection, disaster recovery, and specifically about Druva, feel free to use the questions box there in the GoToWebinar control panel to ask all of your questions, and we have experts standing by to answer those. Also, I want to call your attention to 3 handouts that are available for download there in your GoToWebinar control panel. They are a report from the Aberdeen Group on reducing impact of ransomware attacks via cloud-based approaches, which is what we'll be discussing on today's event. There's also the Insider's Guide to Minimizing the Impact of Ransomware. And then you'll find the Ransomware Checklist, which tells you exactly what you need to do if you do get hit with a ransomware attack. Now we'll have one $300 Amazon gift card to give away at the end of this event to a lucky attendee on the live event today. If you're watching this event on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. Prize terms and conditions for that drawing can be found at events.actualtechmedia.com. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. They are Mr. Dave Packer, Vice President of Product and Alliance Marketing at Druva, and Mr. Derek Brink, Vice President and Research Fellow at the Aberdeen Group. Take it away, Dave.
Welcome, everybody, to today's webcast on ransomware. I'd like to introduce our host today, obviously myself, one of them, but Derek Brink, who is from Aberdeen. He is a CISSP, Certified Information System Security Professional. Welcome, Derek.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Derek is the Vice President Research Fellow at Aberdeen, focused primarily on topics in information security and IT governance, risk, and compliance. He has an MBA with honors from Harvard Business School and a BS in Applied Mathematics with highest honors from the Rochester Institute of Technology. Derek is also adjunct faculty at Harvard University and Brandeis University, where he teaches graduate level courses in cybersecurity. So, great to have you here with us today, Derek. And, myself, my name is Dave Packer. I'm the Vice President of Product and Alliances Marketing here at Druva. And, my role is to help the company really navigate through the technology landscape as information and data management evolves, and how businesses actually handle that data and how they can be more agile and more responsive to challenges with their data. So, obviously ransomware is a key element when we talk about these types of things. So definitely want to make sure that we cover that. And so, as our agenda today, obviously we've done the introductions, but I'm going to hand it over here in a moment to Derek, who is going to talk about some recent research that they've done at Aberdeen and their findings, as well as a quantification of kind of the cost of ransomware in today's environment, what is the impact it has on businesses. And then I'll talk for a few minutes just about, how Druva fits into the overall puzzle of solving challenges around ransomware. So you have a full view of the different elements to ensure that you're successfully positioned to respond to attacks and know what opportunities you have to address ransomware. So with that note, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Derek. And thank you again for being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks very much. Hi, everybody. Derek here, and then thanks to Anya as well and the Druva team. This is my first slide, so I think we'll see this at the end, but there's contact info for later. This is fun for me. I have to say thank you to everybody for having the webinar and for attending. My hope is that you'll get something useful and maybe a bit different out of my section here, which is designed to go to about the bottom of the hour, roughly about 30 minutes or so. But breaking down the relentless risk of ransomware, let me just get into that here. This is a classic, executive summary. It is a top of mind issue. That's why you're probably here. It's a threat for industries of really every all industries and companies of every size, and constantly evolving and adapting by the bad guys, and they're very technically sophisticated and financially motivated. So what I'm going to do, which is the unique value part, I hope, is to just illustrate this in business terms, why we care about this issue. And so I've done a simple analysis. It's simple, but it's fact-based, and it does do something that we all struggle with. It quantifies the issue of ransomware. What's the business impact of ransomware in quantifiable terms, and also how would an investment in a solution like what Druva provides, a cloud-based backup and restore capability, how does that reduce the risk? And you'll see it reduces the impact of ransomware. I'll show the analysis by about 90%, so pretty substantial. These are things that we all struggle with in our day jobs. I'm going to just kind of walk you through that, but let me just get started from the top. How to break down the risk. So let's just make sure we level set about ransomware first. So we all know what it is. It's malicious code that's designed to gain unauthorized access to our data and then encrypt that data. So the good guys can't get access to it unless we pay the ransom. So in exchange for the key to decrypt, recover our own data, we have to pay, typically in a cryptocurrency has been the pattern. Maybe it was a surprise to me, kind of just to look up the data for this slide, but it's been a weapon in their arsenal, the attacker's arsenal, since as early as 1989. That was the first example that I saw. I don't know if that was something you're all aware of, but of course, more recently, it came in the news a couple of years ago with Petya in 2016 it was, and WannaCry a couple of years ago, and not Petra. So that's, I think, really when it vaulted to the top of everyone's attention, but it's been around a long time. Today, we talked about this already. The attackers are more and more sophisticated technically. They're definitely financially motivated, of course, with ransomware, and they're constantly evolving and adapting their techniques. So they're looking to evade the mechanisms that we do put in place and to maximize their own ROI, because that's how they think of it. It's a campaign, and they're trying to maximize the return on investment for the campaign. And so I'll mention just a couple of technical trends. It's really not about that for my section here. The technical trends are important to understand, though. They currently include pretty high growth and the new number of variants. That's what it means when we talked about technically sophisticated and always evolving and adapting. There are many variants. Some of the vendors who have insight into this talk about more than 300% increase in the number of variants, for example. And this is a really important point, as well as they're targeting more than just the traditional endpoints. That's what it has been in the past, but it's increasingly targeting other types of data. I mean, if the goal is to get our data and make us pay to get it back, then they're increasingly targeting other data as well on our mobile devices and on our connected devices, and that's the term I tend to use for Internet of Things, on our on-premises servers and our cloud-based services as well. So that's the issue. That's the ransomware background. But let's switch gears and talk about the risk of ransomware. And some people, I know this from my students at Harvard and Brandeis, they said, well, didn't we just talk about the risk? And the answer is no, we actually didn't. The technical details and the trends and all that are obviously interesting, and they're certainly valuable for the subject matter experts, which that's one of our main roles. But what we really want to understand and communicate to the business leaders is the risk of ransomware. And these things are not risks. We often do confuse the technical information about the threats and the vulnerabilities and the exploits and all the the ITs. We confuse those things with risk, and we commonly use the terms synonymously with each other, but they're not interchangeable. We can't use these things synonymously with risk. The kind of stuff we were just talking about is about the who and the what and the how of ransomware. Again, obviously very important, but risk is about so what. And in fact, it's properly defined. There's no confusion about this. There's no debate. Risk, the proper definition is about how likely is a successful ransomware attack to occur, let's say in the next 12-month period, and how much is the corresponding business impact if it does in fact occur. So if we're not talking about how likely and how much business impact, we're really not talking about risk at all. Not to say that the things we're talking about are not important, because they are, but that's what risk means. So when when we're breaking down the risk, we have to talk about how likely and how much impact. So let's talk about that. If you break down the risk of ransomware on the likelihood side, this is just, and I'm trying to avoid, getting, drowned in the specific numbers, but just try to, stay a little bit higher level. These come from a variety of sources. I've listed one of them there in the footnote. But we can get a sense of several factors. That's the term that we use when we break down the risk. In fact, there's a standard for this. I'm sure many of you are aware of it. It's a standard called FAIR, F-A-I-R. It stands for Factoring Analysis of Information Risk. So on this slide, we're basically talking about some of the factors of likelihood. So these are what the bullets say. More than half of enterprises in one of these studies, it's about 500 enterprises participating in this particular study. More than half of them said that they have experienced at least one ransomware attack in the last 12 months. And of those who were attacked, most of them, the majority of them, were attacked more than once. And most of the attacks impact the endpoints, although, as we've said already, increasingly they're also starting to impact the data on our mobile devices and connected devices, servers, and cloud-based services. About 2/3 of the attacks are successful in infecting at least one endpoint, but more than half of them are actually successful in landing and expanding to infect more than one endpoint before they're contained and remediation process starts. And it turns out in this particular study, and I think this is a general trend as well, very relatively small percentage of organizations these days actually pay the ransom, recover their data. I think in this study it was in the neighborhood of 3%, because almost everybody can restore their data from backups. But just to wrap up on this slide, when we're breaking down the risk of ransomware, these are some of the factors that we would consider if we want to address and begin to quantify the question of how likely. And that leads us to the next part, which is how much impact. This is the other half of risk, right? The first half is how likely. The second half is how much impact. And this is, classic time and money sort of things. The business impact has several potential factors. Here's some here. I'll just kind of touch on them. And the first one is the most important. It's actually the focus of the simple little analysis that I'm going to walk you through in a minute. The lost productivity of the users and the responders. The extent to which the users aren't able to do their work during the time that their data is encrypted and therefore unavailable. To date, this kind of non-availability has been the biggest impact of ransomware. I just can't access my data, I can't do my job. So I've got that sidebar there. That's the traditional triad in information security, the CIA, so-called CIA triad. The confidentiality is if our data, is exposed to somebody who shouldn't see it. Integrity is if the data is, altered in some way. We don't want that. And availability is it's just not accessible when we need it to do our work. And so the biggest impact has been an availability issue. So we have lost productivity during that time. The second one is about, the confidentiality issue. Is it exposed? Is there a breach, basically? And it turns out to date, the attackers really haven't been exfiltrating the encrypted data. That's what they used to do before ransomware kind of caught fire a couple of years ago. They used to, go for a data breach and then monetize the data that way. Ransomware was just a quicker, more efficient way to get to the money, which is their goal. So it's less about the data breach side. And then, we do have examples, and it might be the case for your specific organization. If I can't access the data to do my job, then maybe to that degree, there's a loss of revenue during the time of non-availability. Maybe I can't. Well, in the healthcare example, I happened to be in London when the WannaCry struck a couple years ago, and I was watching the National Health Service people on the morning, news shows over there, and I felt so bad for the guy. But in the case of the hospitals there, patient care was affected because those machines were down. So loss of current revenue could also be loss of ability to serve clients or that kind of thing. And loss of future profitability is kind of a catch-all bucket, which could go into things like if your reputation is damaged, maybe you customers might leave you. Maybe it's going to cost you more to keep current customers and to offering them things through marketing. So these are potential factors on the impact side. And the get to the quantification that I'm going to show you, there's just a couple extra things that we need. We need to know how many devices and users you have. We need to know how much data you have, and we need to know how long it takes you to recover. So that's all you need to do this simple analysis. And I bring this up because I'm going to give you a simple case in point. But when we try to quantify the risk of ransomware, what we're trying to do is help people make a better informed business decision about the risk and about what to do about it. Should we just accept it? Should we? Well, we could choose to avoid it by just not having people online or not having any employees, or that's obviously probably not going to happen. Should we just accept the risk? Do we try to transfer the risk to a third party? Maybe we buy insurance to cover it. Do we invest in additional capabilities to manage it to an acceptable level? We need to communicate about this issue more effectively to the people who control the allocation of resources in the language of risk that they understand. And the way that we do it now really is not that effective for making a better informed decision. When we provide just a lot of technical details, when we try to create some fear, uncertainty, and doubt by sharing the latest headlines, we just give a standalone statistic here or there, not that helpful. When we do qualitative assessments of risk, like red, yellow, green, I know NIST says that that's the way to go, and we all love NIST, right? But it doesn't really help make a better decision about risk. And, the risk is yellow. What does that mean to me? So what? I need to understand how likely and how much impact. And I know that red, yellow, green is created that way, but still it doesn't help me make a better decision. And if you take that, yellow, and you just make it a pseudo quantitative assessment by somehow mapping that, color scale to a, 0 to 100 scale and say, okay, it's a 72, that doesn't really help me make a better decision either. So what that means is we're trying to do our job and help to advise them about the risk, and at the end of the day, they have to make decisions the way they always have, which is on their intuition and their gut feel. So we're not really helping in that sense. So what I want to show you is just a simple way to quantify. It's a simple, well-known technique. It's been around since I think prior to World War II. It's 70, 80 years now. It's a method of analysis known as Monte Carlo analysis. And I just want to give you a simple case in point based on facts about the risk of ransomware. So with that in mind, I'll just kind of roll ahead. This is for simplicity. It's just focused on traditional endpoints. We've already talked about the fact that, as noted, previously, that the bad guys are starting to target a broader set of data than that on our mobile devices and all the way up to the cloud. And that just begs the point that all of our data should be backed up and available and recoverable regardless of the source. But for the purpose of this example, I've been focusing on the traditional endpoint. And so to put it in context, I said there was just a couple things. So this is, to keep it simple, there's 1,000 employees, there's one endpoint per employee, and there's 10 terabytes total of traditional endpoint data that potentially needs to be recovered. And so the focus here is on the lost productivity. That is the biggest one of the impacts that we talked about. And in that sense, if you said, well, maybe some of those other things would apply, then my last bullet on this slide is what I would point you to. That just means, therefore, that what I'm showing you is, if you say, well, you only are going to deal with lost productivity, but there's others as well. Well, all that means is that what I'm showing you is therefore understated. It would be conservative assessment of the total business impact. So, in other words, if you're right, then the numbers I'm showing you would be even worse than this. So I think that's okay. So let me just show you how to do this. I won't go through this in detail. If any of you are interested, I'm happy to share the details with you. But there is a little bit of math when you do a kind of quantification. Here's the main point I want to get across to you. We don't use specific fixed point numbers. It would be the silliest thing in the world to say something like, oh, the average cost per record is $201 per record. That's because it's not that. We don't have that kind of precision. We're dealing with things that are inherently uncertain. And so what we do instead in a Monte Carlo analysis is, instead of those single, fixed point estimates, we reflect the uncertainty in these things by using ranges and shapes within the range. So it's between a lower bound and an upper bound, and it has a certain shape. Is it a bell-shaped curve that we're all used to from school? Is it skewed one way or the other? Is it uniformly likely between the lower bound and the upper bound? These are choices that you have to make, and you make them based on reflecting the best available data that you have. And then you just do the math. So that old movie Dodgeball that I liked, maybe some of you have seen it, the Patches, or whatever his name was, the coach there said, if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. Well, my point in Monte Carlo is pretty simple. If you can make one calculation, you can do the same calculation 10,000 times. And every one of those 10,000 times, you just randomly select the value from these ranges that we have. And then you get 10,000 answers instead of one answer. And from those 10,000 answers, that's where you can get the insight. That the answers in that way give you the answers that we need in terms of how likely and how much impact, consistent with the proper definition of risk. So let me show you how that works. This is what the results look like. You kind of count it up, and I know this, if it's your first time looking at this kind of thing, it might be a little bit intimidating, but don't worry about it. It's just a chart. Again, risk is properly defined in terms of how likely and how much. So this curve on the left side, focus there first. It's called traditionally it's called the LossExceedance Curve. These are standard terms, and as security people, we need to learn how to do this kind of analysis. Everybody else involved in risk, does this kind of thing, and our industry is a little bit less mature in this area, but we need to get there. So the idea of a LossExceedance Curve is that I'll just say it in words. It's Y% likely to be greater than the X value. So here's how you'd read this chart. It's 100% likely to be greater than 0. That's up here. Well, you can't see me point, can you? But the upper left part of the curve, 100% likely to be more than $0 per year. As you move along the curve, you could say, well, what's the 50%? That's the median. So if you looked at 50% on the chart, you kind of moved over to where does that intersect that line, kind of drop down to the x-axis, you'd see that it turns out it's about $500,000 per year. So that's the median. But it's also possible that we could have a lot of infections, and it could take us a really long time to recover, and so on. And so there's a 10% likelihood that it could be even worse. In fact, in excess of $2.5 million. Now that's something that the business leaders can actually use and understand. They understand how to deal with this. They deal with it every day on more positive types of risk. Should we invest in this product line, or should we do this marketing campaign? Those things aren't certain either. But this gives them the whole picture instead of just a fixed point. And so again, we could say things like, for the scenario, the median's about $500,000, but there's a 10% chance there's that long tail. That's the word that people often use. That long tail of risk there can be more than $2.5 million. And now we can ask them, what's your appetite for risk? Is that within your appetite, or would you like me to tell you about my recommendations to reduce that risk? The chart on the right is really just the same data. It's maybe a simpler view. It kind of shows it as a high-low close sort of thing. So at the low end of that line, it's 90% likely to be higher than that. So 90% likely to be more than 0. The median you can see there is a point on that vertical line. That's about $500,000 per year. And then the high part of the line is 10% likely to be higher than that, which is about $2.5 million. So that's a way to quantify with the status quo. So based on these, industry available, capabilities that we see in the survey data and that kind of thing, based on status quo, that's the risk of ransomware. Now, this is where it gets kind of cool. What do we do about that? Assuming that it's not acceptable, well, there's sort of the left side options and then the right side options. Left side options would include to reduce the likelihood, basically. So you might want to make some incremental improvements in, maybe, for example, the technologies that you're using to protect against ransomware, the processes that you have, maybe patching vulnerabilities that are being exploited by the attackers to carry out the ransomware. Maybe the user side. You notice I've got the classic people, process, and technology over there. So one of the options is that since most of these ransomware malware is delivered by phishing attacks and the action of users at the beginning of the kill chain, maybe we want to train the users to be more aware and change their behaviors so they don't click on those things as much. But we're focused today here on primarily on the right side. So it's about reducing the business impact. And the single biggest factor in the analysis we just did is the time to recover. That productivity loss is how many users and how much time does it take to get them back online. And so, ransomware attacks are always going to continue to adapt and evolve and be successful. So again, all of your data, regardless of what type and where it comes from, should be backed up. It's also important that it might not just affect a single user, but multiple users and also multiple devices and types of devices. So again, the point about making sure that everything's able to be recovered one device at a time or sort of on an enterprise-wide scale is another important capability. But let's do the after scenario now. So I did an after comparison. I showed you the before. The after comparison is really based on a cloud-based backup and restore solution. Druva is a provider of such a thing. And I actually used empirical data from Druva about the time to recover for endpoints. This is really as good as it gets in terms of data. Like some of the data I've used before, and telling you about this analysis came from surveys and that kind of thing. This is empirical data. It's the truth. This is how long it took to recover this amount of data for these many endpoints. And the only other thing we need to do that is here on the last bullet. You also have to include in the business impact for the after scenario the cost of the solution. So I have an estimate here for the per user per year cost of the solution. You don't get the benefits of faster time to recover for free. You have to include the cost of that in the after scenario. So let me show you how that works. These are the results. Same chart, but now you can see the after curve, which is the gold line there compared to the original line. So remember, before the median was about $500,000 per year in cost, and the 10% likely, that long tail, was about $2.5 million. 10% likely to be bigger than that, and we dramatically cut that down by deploying the capabilities of much faster, more scalable time to recover, as represented here by a cloud-based solution, Druva. So the median in the after scenario drops from about $500,000 to about $50K, and the 10% likelihood at the long tail over there drops from more than $2.5 million to more like $200K. So overall, it's about a 90% reduction in the business impact of ransomware, and that's net of the incremental investment you have to make. So that reduction in risk, I've kind of shaded in the delta between the two curves there. That's the benefit. That's the reduction in risk. Now, again, imagine yourself in front of the senior leaders. You really have identified ransomware as an important risk. You want to do something about it, and now you're giving them information to help them. First, you give them the before scenario, and they say, you know what, that is too high. It's above our appetite for risk. What can you recommend to reduce that risk? And now you're saying, okay, here's a solution we can get, and here's how it quantifiably reduces that risk. These are things we have to do day in and day out as security professionals, and frankly, high-tech solution providers need to help their buyers to deal with these things as well. And the analysis is really not that hard to do, and that's why, again, it was exciting for me to be able to show you a quick example here about that. So I'm mindful of time. We wanted to take to the bottom of the hour, so we can always come back to this in the Q&A, but I'm going to move ahead and kind of sum it up here. Summary and key takeaways of what I've been trying to share with you here on the webinar. Obviously, ransomware is top of mind. Again, every industry, companies of all sizes, is constantly in evolution and being adapted, and the attackers are not standing still. They're technically sophisticated and they're financially motivated, so we care about it. But we need to help the senior leadership team make better informed decisions, especially if we're asking for incremental resources. We need to communicate effectively, more effectively than we have been, in the language of risk, which means how likely and how much impact. So my little example here, I'm just summing up the before and after on these two bullets. For this organization of 1,000 users and 10 terabytes of data, the median impact is about $500,000, and the 10% likelihood is of being greater than $2.5 million. That's that kind of long tail of that LossExceedance curve. And the after scenario is by investing in a cloud-based backup and restore solution, you can cut that down. The median about 50K, and the 10% likelihood of that long tail drops to about 200K. So this is the benefit of a faster and more scalable time to recover that you get from that kind of solution. This is about a 90% reduction, and that's net of the incremental investment that you have to make. Those are the kind of things that we should be able to convey to the leadership team, in addition to all the technical details. But by the way, just to put a label on this, the technical details and all that, we need to do that typically in our role as subject matter experts. But the kind of thing we're talking about here, and this is where I hope that it's valuable to everybody listening, is that this is the role that we're also, this is an and, we also have to be trusted advisors. We need to take our subject matter expertise, but also translate that into a way that the senior leaders can make better informed decisions. So that's the trusted advisor type stuff that's on this slide. And then lastly, if you are looking for cloud-based backup and restore, you can significantly reduce the risk. We already showed about 90%. I've given you the example here for a traditional endpoint scenario, but it also would apply to all these other categories of data that the bad guys are definitely starting to target now. And I just repeat again, all of your data should be backed up and available and recoverable regardless of what kind of platform it's on. So that for me, I think is the summary, and I think it goes back over to you now. And thanks for listening. Again, I'll be here for questions.
Great, thank you, Derek, and I appreciate it. It's great to see the quantification as well, because I think it's so critical for businesses to understand near-term, long-term impact and costs and all of that when kind of trying to make the decision of what's the best and most effective approach to ransomware in their environment. I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you who Druva is, just to say that we're an organization that's been in the data protection space for over a decade, focused in predominantly on cloud-based solutions to help businesses, better achieve resiliency, recoverability, access to their data. And I think when we look at how the evolution of ransomware has happened over the last few years, the fringe benefit or the side benefit, I guess, of being in the cloud is that we are able to provide a bit of data isolation and air gap between what's on premises, right, and what you have in the cloud, which gives you extra insulation against a ransomware attack that might be very pervasive. And as many of you probably on the phone have done over the years, you're implementing things, you're doing things to kind of thwart many of the vectors that kind of are challenges in creating data loss, not only, malware, but there's other ones as well. But, when we talk specifically about ransomware, we're looking at a situation where, there's a lot of growth in ransomware, a lot of variations. Companies are getting hit constantly by it, trying to protect themselves from it. There are a lot of great tools and applications you can provide and solutions to kind of help thwart it as much as possible. But in the end of the day, businesses are going to be impacted, right? And you got to figure out what is the 1-2 step to ensure recoverability, make sure that your business can be operationally back online within a short period of time. And I think one thing that we've learned over the last few years as a company, as a cloud service that can span everything from servers to endpoints to both end cloud workloads and cloud services, SaaS services as well. There's a lot of different elements that make up the whole. And for us, we do within our service around 4 million backups a day. We recover hundreds of thousands of devices a quarter. We've had a customer actually get hit by ransomware that had 10,000 devices compromised. In a very short order, they were able to recover all that data because it's actually, since it was in the cloud, they weren't sucking up their own bandwidth to do a lot of that recovery. They had a lot of remote workers, a lot of remote sites, all were impacted. Really gave them an advantage in getting back up online in a quick manner. But I think, take a step back and just go beyond the base elements. And a lot of you are aware of this, it's really to be successful, you have to look at a lot of different elements. I'm not saying, hey, backup's the only solution to support ransomware. It's really, there's a lot of different pieces to it. We're all aware of phishing attacks, how spear phishing works, how more targeted that's becoming. And I think, there's obviously applications and tools you can use to identify ransomware. But at the end of the day, how do you ensure recoverability and getting back online in a timely manner in a way that doesn't, it doesn't disrupt your organization or replace data that was corrupted with a new set of data that's got ransomware on it, right? So there's a lot of things that think about this, and we Druva, as a company, we're really about helping businesses pull all this data together into a single cloud service, remove a lot of the infrastructure that creates risk to your business, especially under a ransomware attack. I've heard horror stories from customers where they went in, they had a ransomware attack, it infected their servers, they went to their backup set, and guess what? It was gone. Issues like that where then they have to pull off tape. Now we're talking about recovery point objectives that are days apart rather than hours apart, and that's can have a significant impact to your business, cost, etc. And a lot of smaller businesses, when they're attacked at that level, the impact can be very, very impactful, and it can actually, make a small business actually go under because that's the kind of the key to their business is their data. But our focus is really to help bring this data together. Use that backed up data as a data lake where you can then provide multiple services on top of that data to be more effective, right? So not just data protection, recovery, disaster recovery, et cetera, but also data governance, the ability to understand where your data is, who has it, what's going on with it, any anomalous data changes, things like that that might indicate a ransomware, that type of information. But keeping you on top of your data. And I'll say that, our largest customer deals with around 6 to 10 petabytes of data, which is a lot of data, obviously. Anybody knows the size of a petabyte, but, their concern is that they don't have the facilities to actually scour that data, understand what's there, make decisions on it, identify risks like ransomware, et cetera, or latent, malware type files and things. And so, they've come to us to say, hey, how can you help us, right? And because we have that backup data that we've kind of converted into a accessible data lake, they're able now to search, find that information that's essential to their business. And from, the standpoint of cloud, the real value to most companies is if you're a global company, the global reach, visibility, manageability, the ability to have predictable SLAs, centralized management over the whole system on a global level, which many of our customers have. Fully elastic services, so it's 100% true cloud native. So we're not talking about, spinning up more instances. It's basically on demand in any region at any volume of data that you need to pump into the system for these purposes. But again, as I mentioned earlier, one of the huge benefits our customers have been seeing is just that data isolation and that air gap that it provides to ensure that if there is attack, they have their data off premises. It's a very recent copy rather than a multi-day old copy that they can recover from and re-stand up their systems and get their end users back online as well in a timely manner. Just a scope of, what we provide as a company, we provide what we call our Druva Cloud Platform, which really covers 3 distinct sets of services. One focusing in on end user data, which includes cloud applications and endpoints. Then our Phoenix services, which focus in on virtualized and physical servers and server environments and hybrid environments. So if you have, for example, VMware on AWS and you're also running VMware on premises, how do you make sure those workloads are properly tracked and protected and recoverable? And then our Cloud Ranger services, which if you're a progressive company, you're already adopting cloud, you're already running workloads natively in cloud, Cloud Ranger provides a way to provide those same data protection services by creating a holistic model. So at the end of the day, you have a single view into any of your data anywhere in the world that's managed by the system. The status of it, when it's recoverable, when the last backups happened, any of the posture information regarding your data, the information, and full ability to drill down, right? And when we think about ransomware, what do you do typically? Most companies don't let anybody connect to the network. We shut everything down. Re-imaging devices, right? And then providing the recoverability. And one of the elements that we've seen and it's become important to customers is how do you ensure that last backup was actually a non-infected backup, right? That those files are the pristine files, not the corrupted files. The last thing you want to be doing is recovering 10,000 people and 100 or 200 servers and unaware of what is the safest backup set to recover from, right? And I think that's a critical element that people find out after the fact, right? And then they go, ooh, how do we do this? Because now we're talking about a lot more manual involvement in the process, right? Which we want to avoid. But from the standpoint of what Druva provides, is we actually have built into the system the ability to detect data changes that are outside the normal band for a particular user or device, and be able to notify the organization that there's something irregular going on here, right? So that might be, the system goes to initiate a backup after 30 minutes of a laptop, and suddenly it notices a lot of file changes, right? It will you can kick off an alert, you can set thresholds, etc., but it will also mark the last backup before that happened for you, so that if you do wind up having a mass attack and it goes and affects a lot of systems, all of those systems will give an indication of when the last pristine backup happened that you can then pull your files from, right? And that's a critical element, because the last thing you want to do is restore corrupted data or infected data, right? So, another advantage of this model is because it's in the cloud, even if your end user device is corrupted, they can have immediate access to their data through our service. They basically can log into the web, they can have access to their last snapshots, they can access their last files. So, if it's your CFO who's about to walk into an investor briefing and the machine's completely compromised, they can still provide access to that data so that they can bring it up and make sure that it's still usable, right? And I think, when you think about it, the last thing you want to do is going through a whole recovery process when data needs to be more immediately available. So, having a cloud service provides a lot of facility along that element that makes it, a lot more accessible and available to end users. Now, that said, there's a couple other elements, right? One is, making sure that you have the granular controls for things around whatever devices or SaaS services you have in the backup. And I mentioned SaaS services, a lot of times folks will, when I say SaaS, they go, oh, well, it's, ransomware is an all on-premises, devices thing, and it's not. A lot of your services, like, OneDrive or Box or what have you, they synchronize files from people's machines up to the cloud, right? So you have the unfortunate ability to be syncing infected files up into those workspaces that are then shared across maybe hundreds of other users in your organization who now have those files on their systems too. So how do you make sure that you properly recover back to the primary source and that those files are eradicated in a timely manner, right? So keeping that in mind, and why I mentioned SaaS services, because it's usually a lot of times off of people's minds. It's got to be important that it's put into the equation as well. Other things is just coverage of services, coverage of workloads, all those elements that are obviously key to making sure that you're successful. The last thing you want to do is only have laptops protected and have servers or a virtual environment impacted, not having that air gap, going to your backup sets and realizing that you're now in a real bad situation because you can't recover. And again, as Derek mentioned, the sophistication of ransomware, it's kind of an interesting model right now. What we've seen is actually kind of a drop off in ransomware attacks, like the breadth, but a much more pointed attack level. I go back to, Norsk Hydro is a great example of that, where, one business, greatly compromised by a very pointed ransomware attack, right? And I'm sure over the next few days, as we hear the details of that, it'll be interesting to break it apart forensically and understand kind of what all the elements were that came together to operationally compromise that business. And then, from a restoration standpoint, making sure that your end users have ability to have access to files, that your administrators have ability to understand, again, that comprehensive look of files down to the last few days. What was the last pristine one? Can I go down to the file level if I'm kind of paranoid of recovering the whole system and I just want to make sure certain files I bring back are part of it. So that's key as well. And then, as I mentioned, detecting, ransomware, unusual data activity. Now, this can be a couple things. One can be, amount of file changes, or what we call entropy, right, in the file. It could be the number of deletions. It could be a number of net new files. So this is configurable in a couple of different ways to kind of give you parameters to measure against, depending on kind of what kind of activity you're really trying to hone in on and make sure that you identify correctly. And then lastly, another element I'll talk about for just a second here is, what happens when you have had an attack and you do know the file or the file signature. We actually provide a way for organizations to put in the file signature through a SHA-1 and be able to search across all of your files, across all your data, and identify if there's any other of those that exist out in the environment so that you can eradicate it, right? So you can search, you can identify those files, you can then go ahead and do a disposition on those files, which is the deletion of it. It'll delete it not only from the source, but it will also remove it from the backup sets, right? And as a little bit of an orthogonal note, if you're somebody who's concerned with things like GDPR or have to deal with defensible deletion, that's a model that it can be used for as well, right? So making sure that you have a couple of different paths to be able to eradicate that data that's out there, because you just don't know where it is, if it's latent on a machine. And ransomware's gotten pretty smart to the extent where often it'll be latent on systems for weeks, right? And assessing the system or making minor changes until it's ready to really strike, right? And that's why you have those massive attacks. Again, not to pick on Norsk Hydro, but usually that's what it is, right? The trigger happens and suddenly all of the systems are taken offline at the same time, right? Rather than individually at different points in time. So much more pervasive, much more impactful, right? So, as I mentioned, we look at it as, cloud provides a way to give you that installation, right? To give you that offsite storage, but with more immediate access, right? A lot of people, when we think of offsite storage, we think of tapes, we think of Iron Mountain, those types of things. But you don't have that immediate access. So, cloud gives us a way to not only provide that offsite, but that immediate access, provide that separation of information in a way that makes it difficult to access. But we also store the data in a very unique way. We've actually built our own data layer on top of Amazon Web Services. And that makes that data very difficult to access or corrupt or do anything to it. So some very sophisticated ways of managing data once it's stored. It's one of the main reasons that we're the only FedRAMP ATO product within AWS, in the market of what we do around data protection, because it's a very high bar, and a big portion of that is how data is stored and managed so that it's not accessible or corruptible or hackable. And then, just to add on top of that, AWS also provides very extensive security services, monitoring, et cetera, to ensure that things like attacks aren't happening, that a lot of those things are avoidable. And as I mentioned, for end users, obviously immediate data access, self-restoration. One of the big benefits for a lot of our customers is just not having to have the help desk do all the work, right? And on a ransomware attack, your help desk is going to be inundated. The quicker way and tools you have to be able to get back up and running fast are important, right? So then, some key takeaways. Wanted to be quick here, don't want to use up a lot of time, but, the obvious things, right? Patching, keeping your software up to date, making sure all those things are aligned. We should all be aware of that. We all know that. It's key to any hygiene of any business when it comes to security and ensuring those things are happening. End user awareness, obviously key. Phishing attacks, things that we can do to, help businesses and help end users become more aware. I myself have gotten multiple emails from my CEO that weren't from my CEO, over the last year, saying, hey, I need help with something. Can you, take this, send this spreadsheet to somebody, or, open it up and review it. But, fortunately, I'm also aware to notice, is that the right tone of that person? Check their email address, all those things that are critical, ensuring that we're doing the right things. And then, again, protection against ransomware is a multi-pronged approach, right? It's not only having the malware services and all the elements around it, but it's also having the recovery services, the tools for remediation, as I mentioned, things like deletion, being able to identify things in the backup sets as well, to make sure that you're doing the best hygiene as possible to cleanse your environment, and make sure that you're successful in getting your organization back and operational again as quick as possible. So that's all I had to cover today. Just wanted to give you a quick overview of Druva, kind of how we look at ransomware, how we're solving these challenges for our customers today. And at that point, I think we are going to open it up to Q&A. So why don't we go ahead with the Q&A? Give me one moment here. Let me see the first question here. Do we have any VDI ecosystem partners? We actually can work with VDI partners. We do have some actually, interestingly enough, not in the US, but in Japan, because there's a lot of extensive VDI usage in Japan. And we work with them to help them implement these types of solutions within those VDI environments to ensure that there's greater protection and recoverability of those systems. So yes. Question, you store, we don't really use laptops as much for storing our data. There's a lot of cloud usage. Is there a lot of risk or any risk around that? As I mentioned, it's not uncommon if you're using, a service like Box or Office 365 or Google or whatever, any service that has some type of a synchronization model for that data to be synced up to the cloud, right? There's also other things, folks, I've read about where there's other types of attacks that can happen. So definitely backing up and providing facility for your SaaS services just as critical. In our world, we bring that all together to make sure that you're managing it across all end user sources so that you have a single view and access point to that recovery. See, next question for Derek. Could you also do this kind of quantitative analysis for data on servers, IoT devices, or other services?
Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, the answer is yes, you could. And in fact, Druva, because of the nature of your solution, you actually have the empirical data, like I showed in the after scenario here. Dave, you shared with me data for the time to recover for those other types of servers and so on. I just didn't have the before scenario as easily. Plus, there was the time issue. We only have so much time during a webinar. But yeah, absolutely, the same kind of analysis would be done in pretty much the same way. It's all about the factoring and then just doing the math and talking about risk in the proper way.
Right. Another question is, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. It's a long question, but do we see ransomware as a fad, or is there going to be different types of attacks in the next 5 to 10 years? And there's the comment about the person who asked the question, seeing it more as an evolving and adapting over time. And I would agree with that. I think, what we see is, as Derek mentioned, the concept of ransomware and that model has been around for a long time to begin with. What's really happening today is because of the pervasiveness, or to use a fatty term, but ubiquity of access to tools to build ransomware, and just the overall sharing of knowledge is becoming a lot more broad-based. With that, although, is also a lot more people, since they have access to those information sources, are creating new versions and variants, right, at a very rapid pace to their own desire of attacking whatever they want to attack, right? And so I think over time, what we're going to see is ransomware is just becoming much more sophisticated, much more pointed, hitting more targeted systems. I think, is it going to be going away? No. I think as long as you have state-sponsored environments and there's some form of a cash reward, either through people paying the ransom or through just space, as I mentioned, state-sponsored programs. Those are still going to continue to evolve and change over time. So unfortunately, I think we're with ransomware for quite some time. If it does change in some manner, I'm sure something will evolve to take its place. These types of issues have been around since, the 1980s or earlier, when people first started trying to hack machines. They just become more sophisticated and more, easier to create and deploy over time. So, another question for you, Derek. Is it possible to reduce the risk on your chart to zero? Is there any way to eliminate all the risk?
Well, that's a question that one of the senior leadership team might likely ask, so we should all know how to answer it. And there's probably a finesse way to answer it. The correct answer is no. Of course, we can't eliminate all risk unless we want to, stop using data and stop having employees, right? Then that's not going to happen. So on the chart, if you were to draw a line with no risk, it would be just a straight vertical line. By the way, it means in all likelihood, no matter whether it's 100% or 99% or 50%, all the likelihoods would be $0, and that's just not going to happen. So you can't eliminate risk. Another version of that is saying, could we ever be, completely secure? And the answer is, of course not. That's just not possible. But you can reduce it to an acceptable level, and that's really the way we should be thinking about it. What's the appetite for risk? How much is an acceptable level? And we've always got to make trade-offs, and so that's really the way to think about it.
Great. So another question, can the backed up system data itself be used to identify cryptojacking infection? It's a good question. And can we look at it as, your first line of prevention is, malware services that run natively on the systems, right? You want to try to capture it as it's coming in, or if somebody clicks on something, to whatever possibility. The backup system itself could also be used to identify and find those issues. What we've done in our systems is backups are typically done, every 4 hours. We have some customers that do it every 20 minutes. But the real average for backups is like every 8 hours. And so that's a fairly large window between snapshots to try to detect something on a more live manner, right? So what we do is, that's why we provide the anomaly detection, the ability to identify if there is anything strange going on between those backup changes, to help you identify that, and then also providing tools to go in and do more deep forensic work. I didn't really talk much about the forensic side, but if I found, for example, Derek's machine had a very odd number of interactions, I can go ahead and look at that very last backup within a moment's notice and start doing some data forensics to understand what's actually going on there. And we provide that facility so that companies have the ability to kind of figure out what they need to do and what tools they can apply to it. So, that's what we have there. So, unfortunately, we're just hit the top of the hour, and we're going to have to close it off. Appreciate everybody attending today. And Derek, thank you very much for your time. Very insightful conversation. And thank you for everybody who attended today. And if you haven't received it, you will be getting the bonus research report, that Aberdeen put together, which is reducing impact of ransomware attacks by cloud-based approaches. You can learn more about Druva on our website, or you can, if you're interested in testing it out, kicking the tires, you can do that from the website, or you can give us a call. I'm more than happy to help you navigate kind of what we can provide and how we can help you solve your challenges around ransomware or recoverability and backup in general when it comes to utilizing cloud. So thank you very much, and we'll talk again soon.
Excellent presentation, Derek, Dave. Thank you very much. I learned a lot. I hope that you did too. Before we go, I want to announce the winner of today's Amazon $300 gift card. That is going out to Steph Thimonier, Thimonier, of California. Congratulations, Steph of California. If you didn't win the gift card today, better luck next time. We've got a lot of events over at events.actualtechmedia.com. And before you go, make sure you download those handouts that are there in the audience console. There's the report there from the Aberdeen Group. There's the Insider's Guide to Ransomware, Mitigating Ransomware, and then there's the Ransomware Checklist. So make sure you download those. Also watch for an email that you'll get after this event with a link to the full recording, as well as links to those resources as well. Thank you again to our sponsor, Druva. For more information on Druva, visit druva.com. And thank you everyone who joined us on today's event. Have a great day. Bye-bye.